Hello, my name is Janet Elizabeth Croon. I'm the editor of The War Outside My Window, the Civil War Diary of Leroy Riley Gresham, 1860 to 65, and you are watching Author's Voice.
Welcome to Author's Voice, connecting authors to the world. Today we are watching House Divided. And my name is Bjorn Skaptason. I am your host, and we will be talking about this fantastic book today. It's almost a phenomenon of a book. The War Outside My Window, the Civil War Diary of Leroy Wiley Gresham, 1860 to 1865. It's published by Savas Beatty, and we thank Savas Beatty, as always, for getting the authors here. They're really great partners, and the cost is $34.95. The editor of this work, The War Outside My Window, Jan Croon, is with us here today, and we're going to meet Jan in just a second. But there's a couple things I want to tell you about before we start. First of all, you're watching us live. We are live on Facebook and we are live on authorsvoice.net. And you have a chance to participate in this show. You at home have a chance to participate in this show. I don't know if you're watching on your computer. I don't know if you're watching on your tablet. I have mine right here. You might be on your phone. You can participate in the show. You can submit questions. So if you are watching live on Facebook, please use the comments section to ask your questions, and I'll see them right here, and Jan can answer them for you. And then if you are watching on authorsvoice.net, of course, you'll see it down below the viewer. You'll see a chance where you can submit your questions there. Most importantly, buy the book, right?
Yes.
Buy the book, because that's why we're able to bring these shows to you. The authors write or edit them, as the case may be. It's a labor of love. It's a terrific piece. You're going to want it in your home, but you have to buy it. You order it. The author or editor signs it. We ship it out to you. That's Author's Voice, and that's how it works. Janet Elizabeth Croon, welcome to Author's Voice.
Thank you for having me.
Let me introduce you to the folks at home. Janet Elizabeth Croon holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and a master's in international studies from the University of Dayton. She taught international baccalaureate history for nearly 2 decades at the Fairfax County Public Schools, and then became a Civil War historian.
Yes.
Jan, tell us about how you...
Roundabout.
Give us the short version of the roundabout journey from teacher to historian. Well, they're both teachers.
Yes. I had a side interest in the Civil War, just living in Northern Virginia in what we call Mosby's Confederacy. And I had been at home. I was in between some surgeries and saw on a Facebook post an article by a Washington Post author about the journals that Leroy had written during the war, and thought they were fascinating, great idea, something that could be used in a classroom, and brought the book to my publisher's attention. He had not heard of it. He contacted academics, other people in publishing who had also not heard of it, and we decided to go ahead and work on it.
And to summarize for those who are watching that may not even know the first thing about it, this is a brilliant diary from a young boy, Leroy Wiley Gresham, Macon, Georgia, and he's writing daily about his experiences in the Civil War. Unlike most of our Civil War diaries, he's not a hale and hearty soldier tramping around the landscape. Leroy is, a poor little kid, is afflicted with all sorts of problems. Yes. But before we get too deep into Leroy's problems, tell us something about that Library of Congress exhibit, because that was really something.
That was the sesquicentennial of the Civil War that they had put together and brought out some of his journals that people could see. He wrote 7 in all. They had other objects like the contents of Lincoln's pockets when he was assassinated, other documents, pictures, things like that. But this seemed to be the focal point, especially for that particular Washington Post author. And it just the sense of who Leroy was even shined in that article. So he's a young man. He starts writing when he's 12. He comes from a prominent family. They're slaveholding family in Macon, Georgia. His father is well known, a very prominent person. And he writes about what he sees, what he hears, what people are doing, what's happening in the town. So you see Macon change. You see this prominent family go from the height of their influence to towards the end, where they're contemplating what life will be like if they lose everything. And it looks likely that they may lose everything. So it really shows you a lot of change in a very, very unique way through these daily entries in the journal.
And there's something poetic about the idea of this massive world-changing event that's going on out in the world, and there sits Leroy in his room watching it through the window.
Right, right, because he can't go out. He can't participate in a lot of things, given his afflictions that you alluded to before. So he's a masterful observer. And as a teacher, when I started working with the transcribing, he wrote like a normal 12-year-old, very short, choppy sentences. But within a few years, he's just blossomed into a very eloquent writer, very insightful. He's able to make analysis and really take things apart on an almost adult level, questioning Confederate policy, questioning some of the decisions that battlefield generals are making, and really showing a lot of insight that one would not expect for someone that young.
Well, I think most of the people, I'm pretty sure the people at home are already thinking, well, let's learn a little bit about the source of poor Leroy's affliction. You can't not ask that question.
Yes.
What are the various factors that brought Leroy to being virtually invalided and in his room watching the world?
1856, he was at school, and the boys heard that a building in town had burned. And boys being boys, they decided after school we're going to go and we're going to poke around and see what's left, see what's in there. And that description came from a memoir, an adult memoir of a contemporary of Leroy's in old age that we found. And the building is the Washington Building in Macon. It's now brick. It was wood at the time. But as the boys are poking around, the brick chimney starts wobbling. And somebody says, oh, we got to get out of here. The chimney's falling. And Leroy was the one caught by the brick. And it totally smashed his left leg. So he had, given the medical expertise at the time, several breaks that they had to heal. And what we learned from working on this book was that many, many people had tuberculosis in their systems at that point in time. About 70% of people in the United States had tuberculosis, but it was dormant. And because his body was trying to work on this leg, it became activated, and it's opportunistic, and it started to take over. And so the book opens with Leroy going to see a prominent physician in Philadelphia, Dr. Joseph Pancoast, to see if they can help cure him. Leroy is convinced throughout the book that Dr. Pancoast is the one who can cure him of all his ailments. And but he's not able to help him. His parents know, Dr. Pancoast knows, that he has a rare form of tuberculosis, and there's really not anything he can do to help him. So his advice was keep him laying down, here's some more medication, and good luck. That was basically it. So he doesn't understand what the illness is he has. He does not know he has a terminal disease. He looks forward constantly. Even in the last few months of his life, he's looking forward and wondering, what am I going to become in my life? What can I do? I can't do I can't go to college. I can't do this. I can't do that. But what can I do? I can't just sit here.
Mm-hmm.
So he's driven, internally driven. He's inquisitive. He's very skilled at mathematics. He's a very, very good chess player. He reads everything he can get his hands on. He's reading Shakespeare at 13 and 14 years of age and enjoying it. So he's just an exceptional young man, which I imagined as I was doing a lot of the transcription, I could imagine him in with my students, my contemporary students, and he would fit in with them. He had a wry sense of humor. Mm-hmm. He just wanted to know everything, and he was just, you fall in love with this kid,
Yeah.
which is something that the article points out, is that you fall in love with this kid.
Now, who are some of the other people in his life? And before you answer it,
Mm-hmm.
I want to comment on something you've decided to do in your editorial process,
Mm-hmm.
in that you've created something in this diary which would normally appear in a play script or in a movie
Mm-hmm.
script. You actually give us a dramatis personae
Yes.
right up front. And before we even open the book, we learn a little bit about the people we're going to meet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an extensive web of relationships.
Yes.
An impressive web of relationships that this kid has. And I know it was a lot of work to
Yeah.
get to the bottom of that web when he's calling his relatives by the pet names or the short names that he gives them.
Exactly. The day I found out who cousin Eliza was a big day for me. I even posted on Facebook because Eliza and her 3 children were cousins, and the family tree I had put together now has 1,700 people on it. The name Elizabeth or Eliza, there are 60-some women on that tree with that name, and I had to find the right one, who was evacuating from Savannah with 3 little kids. And there were other names as well, where Cousin Jenks, that's not a common name. It wasn't a family name. Wiley, his middle name is Wiley, that was his grandmother's maiden name, his maternal mother's maiden name. So having to go through that and identify all these individuals was a major challenge, but it helped put together the whole story so that the reader, when they start, they don't have to wonder, well, who's this?
Right.
Who's that? And they were very close. These families, even though they didn't all live in Macon, most of the Greshams lived in Macon, but a number of people lived in Athens, Georgia, which is where his only grandparent, who was alive during the Civil War, his grandmother, resided. Other family members that had other properties in other parts of Georgia. Pulling them all together when they're all so interconnected in each other's lives was, I felt, really important. Mm-hmm. He has one brother, one sister, 2 siblings that died early in their lives, and but this huge extended family that included 6 of her mother's brothers that went into the war, numbers of cousins that had different roles in the war, and keeping all of them straight was part of the challenge.
Does his family members come and go pretty frequently?
Yes.
So the house
Yes.
is not just the nuclear
No.
4 people?
No,
4 or 5 people?
there's family members that appear, they come and go. There's prominent members in the community who also come and go that they interact with on a regular basis. So I had to figure out who those individuals were as well. And it just has made getting to know the antebellum and then wartime Macon, it's just amazing. When we have gone to the cemetery where the family is laid to rest, Rose Hill, which is a unique cemetery. It's all terraced. Each family has its own little block. You drive through there, and I know that family, I know this family, I know that family. These are cousins, and it shows you how interrelated and how dependent people were on one another. Mm-hmm. Even though there was distance in time, they still knew each other extremely well.
And then the next the next chapter in this dramatis personae, the next project that you brought in is, of course, as we see in all other stories of the upper class antebellum and War South, there's this entire other population
Yes.
that's also an important part of his life. And right there, every day, there are enslaved people coming and going. As you said, the Greshams were one of the larger slave-holding families, 2 plantations in the next county over.
Yes.
But still, it seems to be 5 or 6 permanent residents there in the house with him that are housemates with him.
Absolutely.
And he interacts. So what is Leroy's take on slavery, on these enslaved people living with him? Does he notice it, or
he notices them? He notices that there are other people that living in other circumstances than him, but they've always been there. So that it's a constant in his life that Mary has been the cook, and that Howard is the slave who takes pretty good care of the property, and will take the wagon down to the Houston County plantations that they had, which is about a 35-mile ride. So it was a one-day wagon ride to get supplies or to bring supplies from Macon down to the plantations, and how interdependent the house in Macon was with the plantation properties and the people down there. So there's not only the 8 people who worked and lived in the home, including 3-year-old Florence. She was 3 in the 1860 census, actually born the day that Leroy's leg was injured. He tells us that in his writing. And she's growing up as a child in the house, a playmate for one of his cousins, one of his little white cousins, and that was just considered normal. Everybody had a staff. Everybody that they knew did that. So he doesn't really talk about the morality of slavery. In some of his father's extant letters, we've read some of that, where he writes in one letter that he almost wished he didn't have any slaves. He felt so bad because they're working so hard in such miserable, muddy conditions because it had rained so hard. But we don't hear that much from Leroy. We hear him learning things from Howard and some of the other people who come down. Frank builds him a chess table and puts wheels on it so it can roll around. And he seems to be very fond of these people. They were part of his life. He does have a slave companion, a young boy about his age named Alan, who becomes a constant in his life, doing things for him, because there are many things he cannot do for himself.
he has a little wagon, doesn't he?
He does. That's how he
can
gets
get
him
out if Alan goes out with him in the wagon?
Yeah, it's usually Alan who pulls him around town in the wagon because he can't walk. And it was before wheelchairs. Wheelchairs were a byproduct of the Civil War. So he gets around on this little wagon. We don't know what it looks like. We do know that it was occasionally upgraded, so it was more comfortable for him. But basically it was his brother, some of his friends, or Alan who would take him around town to different places. But he did not go to school. He did not go to church. Leroy was not able to attend family weddings or funerals, and there are several. So the people in the town will often send him a piece of the wedding cake the next day, some of the nice things that are left over so he can have some of the sweets, because he does have an incredible sweet tooth. Howard teaches him how to grow the cantaloupe, which is his favorite fruit. So there's a dependence on these people.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. And I noticed, like you said, he does notice them, but he's also a child who's lived with this institution his entire life.
Right.
So there is no questioning of the reality that he lives in. Now we can see about the war itself. Leroy finds out about the war through newspapers, and one of the things we see in his entries is, and you mentioned it earlier, he very quickly matures in his ability to analyze what he's getting from the newspapers.
Yes. He gets news not only from the newspapers, he gets it from telegraphs. Sometimes Mr. Clisby, who is the editor of the the main Macon newspaper, will bring up the telegraphs because he knows Leroy's interested in them. There's letters from the family members that are out on the front. He talks about his Uncle Edge, who's Edgeworth Bird, who was another property owner in the Sparta, Georgia area. He was in Northern Virginia, in Fairfax, and he talked about getting to see Generals Beauregard, Longstreet, and Jefferson Davis when he came into town. So he talks about those kinds of things. He hears stories of the relatives and the friends who came back. He finds out, for example, during Antietam, after the news came back after that, Leroy writes that everybody they knew who was at that battle was either wounded or killed. Everybody was either wounded or killed. So even though he's not there, he does not see anything. The war doesn't really come to Macon until 1864. It's a very personal thing because of all the people he knows who are there.
Mm-hmm. And you live up there in Northern
I
Virginia.
do, yes.
And so one of the first things, I went straight to, of course, opened the book, of course, being the kind of things I like to read, I went straight to the battle days. So
Yes.
when did Leroy find out about the first Battle of Bull Run? And he finds
Yes.
out very quickly that his neighbor, Colonel Bartow, was killed there. And of course,
Right.
Colonel Bartow's monument is prominent there on the Bull Run battlefield. It certainly was first, and then the Federals took it down, and then it got put up again. But so I found that very intriguing because I thought of myself standing there on Henry Hill and with the Bartow Monument, and then here's Leroy talking about his neighbor who had led the local company off and
Yes,
who got
yeah.
killed.
He talks a lot about the training that went on in Macon. A number of the units were trained there at the fairgrounds. They had a fairground south of town. It was a racetrack, was there also. He talks about the munitions factory. They had an armory, an arsenal, and a ballistics laboratory that were all developed in Macon because it was a railroad crossroads. So it was an easy place for people to gather because of the railroads and then get trained. So he keeps track not only of the local boys that leave, including that unit, but the other ones who have been through town and that he's gotten to know and see. Later on, he talks about the officer prison camp. They take the training ground and turn it into a prison camp. And then they develop hospitals in some of the public buildings. The officers were imprisoned in Macon. The enlisted men went off to Andersonville, which is how Macon becomes part of the battle in 1864 when the Union Army under Sheridan.
Sherman and
yeah.
General Stoneman came down.
Stoneman,
and they
yeah.
wanted to try to,
Yes, they were trying to get to Andersonville to rescue those men and failed. Stoneman was captured, surrendered his entire cavalry. But Leroy was on the roof of the house watching that whole battle.
He could see the Battle of Sunshine Church up the way from Macon, couldn't he?
He could, because the house was up on a crest, up in a high part of town. It goes down into a valley where you have the Ocmulgee River, and the Federals were on the other side where it also rises to a crest. So they were firing at Macon from about 2 miles away. And one house, the Cannonball House, it's known today, was actually hit. The lady in the house was coming down the stairs and a cannonball flew through the front door. So that was the only house that was damaged. But he sees all that. He sees all that happening.
Does he make some comment by the time, shortly after that, and by November, Sherman and the rest of the army marches very close to Macon?
They do.
And so does he have much to comment on when the Yankees are that close to him?
He does. He is the man of the house at that point. His brother has become a topographer in the Army of Northern Virginia, and he's in the Shenandoah Valley around the Roanoke area. And his father has been pulled into the Home Guard because he's an older man. He's 53, and he has to go and serve as well. So Leroy's left at home with his mother and his sister, and because they're coming so close, they send his sister away so that she'll be safe. She's 2 years younger than Leroy is. So she's about 15 years old, and they felt it was too dangerous for her to stay in town if it's invaded. So a matron lady offers to take her with her to another town, and Leroy keeps track of how much money he gives Minnie. And Minnie goes off with this other older widowed woman who they now call Aunt. So, so she's safe.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to go and retrieve her later when everything's all clear and both Father and Thomas are back at home.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's so much to learn about in Leroy's story, and of course, when we get to the end of his life, as you say, he dies here in the book in front of us.
Yes.
And some very very affecting passages, and I think very affecting for the fact that you've chosen to just serve them up the way they are.
Yeah.
To stay very close to his writing as it went along, and then commentary on it. Was that something that you decided to do early, rather than inserting more narrative from your pen into the story?
We decided to use footnotes
Yeah.
because we wanted to leave the writing to be his. As a high school teacher, it was really hard for me to not correct the misspellings. He spells Tuesday wrong for a couple of years, and he gets it right, and I'm like, yes, and then it's wrong again. I'm like, oh dear, he made a mistake and made it right. Yeah. So that was something that we decided to leave it as authentic as possible, and then to explain in footnotes any kind of elaboration that would be needed for the reader, so that we weren't inserting ourselves into his story, because we weren't there. And we did not know for the longest time what it was that he had. We could not agree on what it was that he had because he didn't know, so he couldn't tell us. So we had hints here and there. And my publisher, Ted Savis, decided to have me write up what I called Leroy's medical records. It was all the excerpts from the whole transcript that were medically related. And we sent those to another one of Ted's authors, Dr. Dennis Rosbach, who is a surgeon, and he came up with a diagnosis that surprised us both. We had no clue because there are stereotypes to different kinds of diseases, and this one didn't follow any of the stereotypes that we were aware of because tuberculosis doesn't take that form.
Right. I want to talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
Here. Now, for the folks at home, we're scheduled for a 30-minute show today, but there's nobody coming on after us, and we're having a good time. So we're gonna press our time a little bit here because there's a couple of things I really want to know from your perspective,
Okay.
Jan. But for the folks at home, we'll probably tell you about as much of the story of Leroy as we're going to on this show, because we want you to buy the book. If you really want to get to know this kid, he's a great kid. If you want to get to know this kid, you need to buy it and read his words.
Yeah.
There's only so much we can say as
Right.
far as
he's funny. He's amusing. He's got a biting wit. He tells you what he thinks of people, including the generals. He has his favorites. He has his not favorites. And some of the revelations he has on political figures are also kind of amusing as well. So yeah, you definitely
want to read. You want to read what he wrote. But what I want to ask you, Jan, is you've spent 20 years teaching.
Yes.
And you've spent 20 years teaching kids that are
his age.
Yeah. So how effective can be the actual artifacts of something like these journals? How effective can it be in the classroom if you have actually an opportunity to show the kids some
that was one of the things that from that initial Facebook post that really attracted me, because I have really had a good luck using primary artifacts. They can be documents, newspaper articles, journal entries are very powerful. And when you can get a kid something written by someone who is the same age as your students, they can put themselves into that person's position and feel what it was like to possibly have been living during the war at that time, to watch his brother go off and fight, to watch friends go off and fight, to find out that somebody that they care about very deeply is a prisoner of war. They had to deal with that as well. And I found that to be a really good mechanism to hook kids in. So I've often used artifacts, primary source documents, going back as far as I can. I think the oldest one I've ever used was a political cartoon that was a satire on Cromwell in England. And just because I think they are so powerful. And some of them can be downright amusing too. And then talking about the stories of real people as opposed to just focusing on the presidents and the kings and the prime ministers. You talk about the real actual people who experienced some of these things can be amazingly powerful. I taught World War II from the perspective of civilian populations and the abuse of civilian populations, everything from the rape of Nanjing to the Holocaust to the forced repatriation after the war, Japanese internment camps, and the kids became engrossed not only in the battles, but in the stories of these people who survived these kinds of atrocities. And knowing that they had grandparents or great-grandparents, depending on how old the kid was, that were that same age. So we had a Holocaust survivor who used to come in and speak to our students, and she was only a few months older than my own mother. Mm-hmm. And their existence, their growing up, was so very different. Right. So
something like this, yeah. book, or something like the diaries in Library of Congress and the exhibit
yes.
that they created.
Right.
It can be enormously useful for teachers. And I know Library of Congress has other similar things. I know Gilder Lehrman Institute in New York is built for that. And they went out and collected stuff from people like us.
Right.
They collected those documents from
National
people like
Archives.
Abraham Lincoln Bookshop. And then now they're sharing them with teachers. If you have any other favorites you want to suggest to teachers out there?
I have gone to the Virginia Historical Society in Richmond. They have wonderful archives down there. I've gone to some of the presidential libraries. I've been to the Woodrow Wilson Library, and they were very generous with what they had in Stanton, Virginia. So working with archives, archival documents can be hard work for a teacher, but it can also be really rewarding when you come up with something that's really awesome for kids to work through. I am working on a curriculum guide with a friend of mine who is a middle school teacher of English in New Hampshire, which is a Common Core state. Virginia is not Common Core, but we're blending the two. Okay. We're going to use Virginia history standards with the Common Core English and writing to really help teachers use this book as a source with students so that the kids can get the most of the book from many different levels. We often have kids with many different academic abilities in our classrooms today. So that way you can have something for the upper end kids and have something else that the kids who maybe need more support to get through a book like this. So that's available for them as well.
Great. Yep. Now there's the last topic I want to touch on before we wrap this up is you mentioned it before. Your colleague, Dr. Rasbach,
yes,
there's going to be more to this.
Yes,
there's going to be more to this story. Well, first of all, your curriculum is going to be an important part of it. But Dr. Dennis Rasbach is producing what apparently is going to be called "I Am Perhaps Dying."
Yes.
And so, before we get him here, you tell us, how did Dr. Rasbach support your research, and how did you and Mr. Savas bring him in, and what did he find that surprised you?
What he found was, after we sent him the document with all of his medical complaints, all the medicines that he used, all of his physical complaints, from the broken leg all the way to the end. Again, because Leroy didn't know what he had, his parents did, but they did not tell him. They made that conscious choice. I probably would have made the same choice. to keep my child alive and hopeful and around as much as long as possible. But he was the one 2 weeks later who called Ted and told him, I've got a diagnosis. And it was a rare form of tuberculosis that is not often seen, called spinal tuberculosis or Pott's disease. And you don't have the polite cough and the white handkerchief with spots of blood. That would have been a clue to him. He would have known then what it was. But he never had that as a symptom. He had a lot of pain in his back and in his legs. He oftentimes will say, chop off my leg or saw off my leg, because it was painful. And he had a natural sense that everything he was experiencing went back to the leg, and in a roundabout way it actually did. But he was able to explain to us the copious amounts of powerful medications this kid was taking. It went everything from using lavender to relax him to lots of beer. He's drinking porter beer. He's drinking Catawba wine, which we look at today and think he's underage. Well, that wasn't so much the problem then, but that was calories for Leroy. As a lot of times he couldn't keep his food down. So that beer and the wine would relax him, and he had caloric intake with that. He was taking opium. He was taking a compound called Dover's powder, which was half opium and half the dried active ingredient of syrup of ipecac. So you couldn't take too much of it without throwing it back up. He was taking morphine, laudanum, compounds with mercury. It was just horrific. And I wanted to know, how is he able to function when he's got all this stuff that we worry about today in his system? And Dr. Rosbach's answer was simple. He said that he had a legitimate pain need. And the pain medication would go to the brain, cut the pain, so it allowed the rest of his mind to function at the high level that it was functioning at. Whereas people that are taking things that they're not allowed to have in school, opiates, you name it, they don't generally have a legitimate pain need. They may start with one, but after their need for that medication is gone, then they've got the hook, and they keep taking it. And he said that's how he was able to still take all this stuff and write so well.
All right.
And so completely. So he not only, explained to us what was killing this boy, but also why all the medications.
Well, watch out in the not too distant future for I Am Perhaps Dying by Dennis Rasbach, MD.
Yes.
And it will be a necessary appendix
Yes.
to this remarkable book. And The War Outside My Window, the Civil War Diary of Leroy Wiley Gresham, 1860 to 1865. We're going to talk about it a little bit before we finish, but first, let's talk about what's coming up. I want to talk to the folks at home about what's coming up on Author's Voice, connecting authors to the world. A House Divided is our next show. It's this show. We're going to do this show again, but Dan Weinberg will interview Pulitzer Prize-winning author Doris Kearns Goodwin about her new title, Leadership in Turbulent Times. Join us for that event on October 30th at 12:30 p.m., 12:30 in the afternoon, and that is Central Time. Yes, Doris Kearns Goodwin will be back here. We'll see if she can follow up this great show. I had so much fun today. The next show after that, Stranger Than Fiction. And host Angela Watson welcomes author and editor Robert Brugman to discuss a truly beautiful collection of photographs and history in Art Deco Chicago, designing modern America. And if you haven't been distracted before during the course of this program, you might see it over my shoulder right now, sitting behind me. It's a beautiful book, and anybody that loves Chicago and anybody that loves Chicago architecture is going to want to have this book. Art Deco Chicago, Designing Modern America. That's Halloween, October 31st at 3 p.m. Ask questions during our shows. If you're watching this program later at authorsvoice.net, you can still order a copy of the book. We're going to have signed copies that we can send to you. If you're watching this on YouTube, on our YouTube channel afterwards, after the broadcast, Again, you can still order a signed book. There's a link right there, a link right below the video. Click on that, and we will send you a signed book. So thank you very much, Janet Elizabeth Croon.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to Chicago and to Author's Voice. Thank you for introducing us to Leroy Wiley Gresham, and congratulations on a fine book.
Thank you.
And until next time, to the folks at home, we'll see you later.